guys, Ben here with Oddly Armed, and today I have another review for you, this time of an Israeli IWI Galil ACE, and mine's going to be a Generation 1. So let's talk about the Galil ACE, where it comes from, and see how I have mine set up. I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about the original Galil, which was adopted by the Israeli Defense Force back in the mid-1970s. That's really going to be a story for another day because I will very likely have my hands on a Galil ARM or one of the other earlier variants at some point to review, so I'll get more in depth on it then. However, the Galil was adopted into Israeli service mid-1970s again, and it served with them up until the 1990s when it was eventually replaced by, for one, the Tavor, as well as many AR variants which were always equipping their military. Now, one question that does come up when you're talking about Galils, whether it's going to be the ACE or the original variants, how close is it to an actual AK? So when you look at the mechanics of the Galil, it's straight up AK. Everything in there, the way that the three-lug rotating bolt works, the way that the long-stroke gas piston system works, everything, to include a lot of different parts, are actually fairly similar between the two, like your trigger groups. Not necessarily interchangeable, but it's close enough to where I consider the Galil to be another AK variant. The original Galil actually sold fairly well on the commercial market to a bunch of different militaries around the world, but in particular in South America, and even more particular than that, Colombia. So they had adopted the original Galil as their standard service rifle. However, when it got into the mid-2000s, the original Galil was starting to show its age. In some areas, such as weight, it was very heavy rifle. And then, of course, it's pretty difficult to equip it with optics or rails, stuff like that. So the Colombian military actually worked with IWI, who at that point, they were no longer making the original Galil. And past that, they had actually destroyed all of the tooling to make new ones. So really, they needed to build an entirely new rifle from the ground up. And in 2008, after working with the Colombian military as well as Indumil, a Colombian company, IWI perfected and came out with the original Galil ACE. When comparing the ACE to the original Galil, there's really some enhancements in quite a few areas. For one, ergonomics have been drastically improved in the Galil ACE. For the controls, you actually moved the charging handle from the right side, although it's upturned on the top, so it's easier to hit than a typical AK, to the left side of the rifle, even though it's still reciprocating. So that's a pretty big improvement there. They also updated and improved the stock for length of a pull and gave it the ability to take cheek risers. And they also lowered the weight quite a bit. Now, you'll see in some documentation or some talk about it that was by introducing a polymer lower receiver to the Galil. However, if you actually take that polymer lower off, as I did on my rifle here, you'll see that it still has that classic Galil milled receiver underneath. So I think a lot of the weight savings were actually from lightening the lower receiver itself on the internal side of things by just thinning out the materials. Or at least that's my guess on where most of the weight savings came from. For the 5.56 variants of the ACE, they also added bolt catch, bolt release on the right side of the rifle, which was a huge ergonomic improvement over the original Galil. IWI also introduced the Galil ACE in 7.62 by 39, which the original Galil was never chambered in. So why that's important is a lot of countries at this point were still using older variants of AKs, which again were pretty well aging into the 2000s. And they aren't very good at taking different improvements such as optics and then rails, accessories, stuff like that. But the Galil ACE allows them to use their original AK magazines as well as have all those other upgrades that you're really looking for in the 2000s. So you can add optics to it, you can add rails, whatever you need to actually bring the rifle up to the 21st century. IWI also released a 7.62 by 51 or 7.62 NATO version of the Galil, which kind of harkens back to the original Galil because again, they also had a 7.62 NATO version of that as well. But that was the battle rifle caliber, and they even had sniper variants of it. And between the different calibers, they also had multiple different barrel lengths as well. For the shortest one, you had 8.5 inches, so you'll see the 5.56 and the 7.62 by 39 ones chambered in that. They also have a very short barreled version of the 308. I can't remember exactly what the length is on that. But you'll also have the carbine length barrel, so that's around 13 inches, and that is what mine is. And then you'll also have a 16-inch rifle version as well. And there is one additional caliber, and that's 5.45 by 39, the classic Russian caliber. However, those seem to be more of an American thing than anything else, and I haven't really seen them go outside the US civilian market. When it comes to magazines, there's also multiple different variants of the Galil ACE. For 5.56, you have the classic Galil Rock and Lock 35 round magazines, like the one I have in my rifle. They also released a NATO variant, which used standard Stanag magazines. For the 7.62x39 Galil ACE, that used just regular AK magazines and of course would not have the bolt hold open like it does on the 5.56. For the 7.62 NATO variant, that utilized standard AR-10 style SR-25 magazines, I believe the DPMS pattern ones. So those are actually pretty easy to find, and I've actually seen a couple of people convert those back to utilize the old 7.62x51 Galil magazines. While quite a few countries have adopted the ACE, there's also a couple of countries that have started to build them in-house by getting licenses from IWI. So first up is going to be Colombia again, so they were involved in the creation of the ACE, and they're still using it to this day, along with a modified version called the Galil Cordova. Now, Chile is also working on building the ACE in-house, and that's at the FAME factory, which is pretty cool. They actually used to do some variants of the Swiss 540 series of rifles, but that's another country that's building them, as well as Peru is also tooling up to be able to make Galil ACEs in-house. And Ukraine has actually always had a pretty close relationship to IWI for some reason. They also build the Tavor, but they also have a license to build the ACE at the Fort factory. And then finally, Vietnam has also adopted and is currently producing their own variant of the Galil ACE as well. As far as US civilian sales goes, the IWI Galil ACE has been on the market since the mid-2010s, and it's actually been a very popular seller. Now, for years it came in as either pistol or rifle forms in either 5.56, 7.62x39, or in the 308. I actually had one of the original 308 variants years ago, but they've been pretty popular in the US. However, in 2023, IWI was looking at kind of pulling in more shooters from the US market that were typically going to be buying AR-15s. So they went ahead and modified the Galil ACE and made the Gen 2, which utilized a free flow M-LOK handguard. And then it also made some other changes, like it got rid of the original iron sights and then went to a AR buffer tube style of stock. For a lot of shooters, that was actually kind of a downgrade, particularly for me being a collector. This is the military version of the Galil, and the Gen 2 is more of a civilianized, Americanized version of it. However, it is still a solid rifle, and some of those features will definitely enhance it, such as the free-floating handguard. Alright guys, and that gets us up to date on the history of the Galil ACE. So let's go ahead, get in a close look at mine, and see how I have it set up. And big shout out to the Echo Valley Training Center in Cape on Hill, West Virginia. That's where I did the accuracy testing for this rifle and a bunch of shooting over the years. So if you're in the DC area, please check them out. All right, starting from the front here, I do have my Huxworks HX QD 5.56K. God, I hate X's and words because they're hard to say, but this is a good can for this rifle. It is flow through, which is important because this does not have an adjustable gas block. And moving back to the front sight block, you can see there is a front sight post in there that does have a little tritium insert in it, so you can see at night using these sights. And moving back, you can see the top rail there on top of the gas piston or the gas tube. And then I also have an RS Regulate M-LOK handguard on this as well, and a B5 grip. Now moving back to the optics, I do have a Meprolite True Dot on this rifle, which is a pretty nice optic overall, Israeli, so it kind of fits into the optic setup that I got going on here. And then just a primary arms 3x magnifier, and then you can see the rear iron sight there actually has two more tritium inserts. I don't really like tritium inserts in the rear sight, but it does its job overall. Now moving down to the receiver, you can see this beautiful finish, and then it is a classic milled AK style of receiver. The cool thing about the 5.56 ACE is it does have that right side bolt catch, bolt release, as well as that right side more or less AK style safety selector. And then the model I use here utilizes classic Galil 35 round magazines. These are good magazines made out of steel. And then I also have a K&S Precision plastic delete, so this replaces the original plastic lower receiver cover. And then I also have a K&S Precision grip on here with a little compartment underneath, and this is meant to mimic the original Galil pistol grip. Now moving back to the stock, I do have a classic Galil ACE stock on here, and this does have the ability to take cheek risers like you can see there, and has a nice rubber butt pad as well. Moving over to the left side, there's not a whole lot more to see over here. We just have the can again, as well as our front sight. And then moving back on the receiver, you can see our classic M-LOK handguard there. The first thing that's different on this side is going to be the charging handle, which is on only the left side, and it is reciprocating. And you can see this plate, which is spring-loaded behind it, actually covers up the slot in the receiver that the charging handle goes back and forth in, reciprocates in, so that it stays clean on the inside of the rifle. So we'll just get another look at the optics here. Really nothing too crazy. And then coming down here, another feature of the Galil is it does have a safety selector on the left side, which is actually pretty easy to operate for a right-handed shooter like me, and is a major ergonomic improvement over the original AK. And then the magazine release on the Galil ACE is also enlarged over the AK and is very, very easy to actuate. Now moving back to the stock, this is side folding as well, and you can see it does have that classic FAL style locking mechanism there. But really nothing too crazy else to see over here. Let's go ahead and kick off the ratings with accuracy, where the Galil ACE is going to get a 4. Utilizing 55 grain M193 ammunition from Aguila, I was able to get a 1.56 MOA group at 100 yards with this rifle, which was actually incredibly impressive, and I'm very happy with how well this shoots, particularly given it doesn't have a free-floated barrel. And then that's also just utilizing standard ball ammunition, so that goes to show that AK platforms, when well made and using okay ammunition that's not 7.62 by 39, can actually be quite accurate. Next up we got Aftermarket, where I'm going to give the ACE a 3. So as far as different companies making parts for this rifle, there's a couple of big ones out there. RS Regulate, absolutely love their handguard, which I currently have on this rifle. It's beautiful, fits it great, one of the best purchases you can get for one of these. You also have K&S Precision, where they come in a couple of different places. For one, this lower plastic delete kit is fantastic, and it also gives you the ability to use AR-15 style grips with this rifle. And then for mine, I also got one of their K&S Precision Galil style grips to kind of give it the look of one of the older style of Galils. Another area that K&S comes in is going to be in the gas system. They produce adjustable gas pistons for these, which is pretty important because from the factory, Galil ACEs are generally going to be quite overgassed. So that is a solid upgrade from one of these, particularly if you're going to suppress it. Now, Midwest Industries also makes handguards for these rifles as well. And then JMAC Customs makes things like stocks, as well as different muzzle devices if you're going to suppress different models of it as well. A3 Industries also makes stocks for these, as well as Double Star is one of the classics. They make a tube style, kind of the original Galil style or FAL style stock, which you can get from one of these to give it a more classic appearance. And then finally, ALG makes their AK trigger. Now, one thing to keep in mind with that is it will only work really in the 7.62 by 39 variants. There are some extra parts in the lower receiver for the 5.56 ones due to the bolt catch, which makes it not work straight from the factory. There is a company, Dissident Arms, which I actually got this rifle from originally, that does sell modified versions of the AKG, which will fit in these rifles, but that is going to be a part you're also going to want to have installed by a gunsmith. Moving on to durability, I'm going to give the ACE a 5. This rifle is an absolute tank, so the finishing on all the steel components is at this absolutely beautiful kind of dark gray color. I'm not sure if it's a phosphating or exactly what it is, but it's held up very, very well, and I've even had some scratches or some things which would scratch it, such as some picks when I was installing some stuff into the receiver, and it really didn't take a gouge out of the finish at all, so it looks like it's going to be incredibly tough and hold up very well over time. Now, of course, this rifle and all Galils utilizes a milled receiver, so this is going to be absolutely solid, and it's very well made, very well milled out, and I can't see anything breaking on there. The polymer components are all also very high quality and well made. This is a military rifle, and I expect it to hold up to military style conditions. And next up, we have Ergonomics, where I'm going to give the ACE a 4. Now, ergonomics is one area where I think the Galil really comes ahead as far as AK style of rifles go. Now, up front, we don't have that adjustable gas block, so this is going to be solid. You're really not going to have any controls up here. Again, you can replace it with a K&S piston if you want to have adjustability. But moving back, one of the biggest things that has been improved on the Galil ACE is going to be our charging handle. So instead of having it on the right side attached to the bolt like it is on an AK, they moved it over to the left side of the receiver. Now it is still attached to the bolt and it is reciprocating, but the channel that you normally have on the right side of the rifle for the charging handle to ride in is still on the left side. However, instead of having the safety selector like on the AK cover it up, they built in this cool little plate which is spring loaded and pops up into place. So that covers that channel so that dirt won't get in there when you're not shooting the rifle. And then if you put the bolt all the way back with an empty magazine, you do have bolt hold open on the 5.56 variant, either with the original Galil mags or the Stanag magazines. Now you also have this very nice big safety selector here on the left side of the rifle. So for righty, this is fantastic. It's in a good spot. It's easy to articulate. And when you do articulate it, you can see the safety on the other side of the rifle, the AK style one, moves as well. So we'll go ahead and take a look at that. And this safety, it's small. I don't really use it for anything, honestly, but it is there if you have a reason to use it. Now, the biggest thing that I like on this rifle is going to be our bolt release. So there's a little nub on the right side here. If we press down on that, it's going to go ahead and send our bolt home. Now, I did replace the nub that was originally on here with a K&S one. This thing is a massive pain to install, but it does give you a little bit more of a ledge to work with. Now, your magazine release is a gigantic MIMT panel down here, so it's very easy to use. The Galil mags here are good quality. They're steel magazines. Some of the surplus ones, if they're older, they might not work so well, but as long as they're well maintained, they're pretty solid. And then there is a difference in the follower between the original mags, which don't have a bolt hold open, and the newer ones, which do have a follower, which lets you hold the bolt open, if I can get that to lock in there. All right, and that's about what we have to go on there. Your stock will fold to the side, so if you press it down, then it will come over and on the side there, and you do have enough room to let casings get out so you can shoot it folded. However, you can't get to like your bolt release, anything like that in there. There's not enough room. And then flipping it over, you can see it just utilizes a Galil or FAL style locking system here with the two hooks that go up together, and it is super solid. Now, as far as the stock goes, we do have a cheek riser on here, and there are different heights, and then you can also move it forward and back. And then you also have multiple lengths for the length of pull, so you can adjust that. And it's very, very nice stock. It's pretty solid without a lot of wobble. And that's all there is for ergonomics. Next up, we have maintenance, where I'm going to give the ACE a 4. So when it comes to disassembly, for the most part, it's going to be like a standard AK. There are some differences though, and where I'm actually going to be dropping off that point is it's a little bit difficult, particularly with the top cover of this rifle. And especially if it's your first time doing it and you haven't gotten some experience with it. So the main reason for that is you have the rail on the top cover, which holds your sights. So you have your iron sights on there, as well as your optics are going to go on that top cover. So on this typical AK, it is very loose when it comes to that top cover. On this, it needs to be much tighter to maintain a 0. So it is a pain to get this back on the rifle. And then this also has an extended nub attached to the recoil spring, which is used to disassemble this rifle. And that's important because they originally had that on there for rifle grenades and then also to help it maintain that 0 as well. So that makes it a bit of a pain to get the cover back on, in addition to how tight it is. Now, one thing that is a little bit easier is your gas tube is actually dovetailed into the receiver here. And as soon as you take your bolt carrier group out, you can also take that off. So there's no separate lever that you need to flip to get into your gas tube. Other than that, as far as replacing parts goes on the Galil, IWI does sell certain replacement parts, but not a ton of them. So for instance, firing pins, you can get those. I haven't seen them carry bolts. I will say this is incredibly well made, so I'm not super worried about parts breaking on it, but there is that potential and they might be a little bit difficult to get a hold of. When it comes to modularity, I'm going to give the ACE a 4, and there really is quite a few options that you can use to modify this rifle. So starting from the back, of course, you have the stock, and then you can get different options here. You can get a Picatinny rear cover, you can get different rails or different stocks from JMac, Double Star, You can even get adapters to use an AR-15 style of buffer tube, so you do have options there. Now the next part is going to be the lower receiver, and this is provided you switch to the K&S Precision Plastic Delete Lower that I have on here. The original plastic lower on the Galil ACE has an integrated pistol grip, which you can't swap out. It's a nice grip, it works well, but this gives you the option to utilize AR-15 style of pistol grip, so that kind of opens you up to a little bit more there. Now, as far as triggers go, again, if you have the 7.62x39 model, you can use a ALG AKG trigger in one of these, which is a solid upgrade. However, due to some of the bolt hold open parts that are in the 5.56 variant of the ACE, you can't use those triggers unless it's been modified. Now for handguards, you have quite a few different options, and they're very, very nice. So you have the original Picatinny style handguard, which is kind of big, fat, and has some integrated rail covers in there, but you can replace that with like this K&S handguard, which is absolutely fantastic. Midwest Industries. There's a couple of different options out there. Now, as far as changing calibers, that's where I'm actually going to be dropping off a point here, because at its heart, it is still an AK. So you're very limited on what you can do to swap out the barrel. Since it is, I believe, pressed and pinned into the receiver here, you really can't swap this out for any other barrel length or caliber without going to a very experienced gunsmith. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend doing that. And next up, we're going to have price, where I'm going to give the Galil ACE a 3. Generally on the market right now for a Gen 1 Galil ACE, you're going to see them going anywhere from $1,500 to around $2,000. Now, every once in a while you'll see one pop up for a little bit less than that, but that's generally where you're going to see them. Now the Gen 2s, I've actually seen a couple go for less than that, but that range is going to be about the same for them as well. When it comes to shooting characteristics for the ACE, I'm going to give it a 4. The trigger on these is a definite improvement over the original Galil triggers. However, it's still a little bit on the heavy side, coming in at about 6 pounds 12 ounces. That being said, there's a little bit of sponge to it, but it's really not bad, and it's pretty easy to get off some good shots with this rifle. Now, as far as recoil impulse goes, being an AK, and particularly being an AK style weapon that's meant for military service, from the factory, this thing is pretty overgassed. So you're going to be getting a lot of bolt velocity, which translates to some fairly stiff recoil. It still is not bad on this rifle because it is fairly heavy, all things considered. But there is definitely an overgassing thing going on here. Now, as far as using the Galil ACE suppressed, it is really a good idea to be using a low back pressure can, whether that's the Huxworks HXQD 556K, the flow-through can that I have on here, or any one of the other myriad of options of flow-through cans on the market. That is a solid upgrade for this rifle, and particularly if you don't want to mess with the gas system. Now, if you do want to swap out that piston for one of the K&S adjustable pistons, that will help you kind of narrow down the gas range to where it's going to work well with both this suppressor and potentially for a higher back pressure suppressor, but you are going to have to swap out the piston to get that. Now, if you don't swap the piston with a full back pressure can, this thing is going to be super overgassed. I'm not going to be super worried about it beating itself to death because it's so well made and it is pretty tanky, but it will be very overgassed and you're going to definitely feel it. In terms of reliability, I'm going to give this guy a 5. I really haven't had a single malfunction that was due to the rifle. Now, I did have a single issue with it on one range day, and that was where I tried to chamber a round and it didn't fully chamber, so I went to go ahead and eject that round. I think it was actually out of spec, and then the crimping was obviously not that good on the bullet itself because the bullet stayed inside of the bore when I went to go eject the round, and it left a bunch of powder residue and stuff in the chamber, and of course I couldn't chamber another round behind that, thank God, because that would have been a really bad situation if it had actually done that. But that was the only issue I had that was 100% ammo related and not the rifle's fault, so its reliability is fantastic. When it comes to weight, I'm going to give the ACE a 3 since it comes in at about 7.5 pounds, which seems pretty heavy, and it really is, but it is lighter than a lot of AKs out there, and particularly milled AKs. So they definitely did a fairly good job lightening the weight considering it is a milled receiver. And when we go ahead and add up all 10 categories, we come out with a score of 38 for the Galil ACE, which puts it up into the A tier. Now, some of the high points for this rifle are its accuracy was actually a lot better than I was expecting to get out of it. Its durability is absolutely top notch. I don't expect to have any mechanical or wear issues with this rifle. The ergonomics are a major improvement over other AK variants. And then it's also not a bad shooter, and the reliability is very, very good. The main downsides to the ACE are going to be its slightly smaller aftermarket support, as well as the maintenance on it can be a bit of a pain, particularly if you're new to the platform due to how tight that top cover fits on it. And then it also is not exactly the lightest rifle in the world. It's fairly heavy, given that it's a milled receiver style AK. Now, when it comes to the cool factor, I'm going to go ahead and throw the ACE up into the A tier. Now, for one thing, it's just a cool looking rifle. I really think that IWI did a good job in just making this an attractive gun. Now, as far as film usage goes, there really isn't that much. The two places I can really think of it's popped up are the newer RoboCop movie, it was in there, as well as Resident Evil Retribution, it popped up in there a couple of times. The ACE has actually showed up quite a bit more in video games. So some popular series like Battlefield, it was in Battlefield 4 and Battlefield Hardline as well. It's also been in a couple of the newer Call of Duty games. I believe Modern Warfare as well as Black Ops 6 had different variants of the Galil ACE. It's also been in a couple of the Far Cry games, Far Cry 3 and Far Cry 4, as well as Counter-Strike Global Offensive. So it has had quite a few video game appearances. Alright guys, and that's going to do it for my review on the IWI Galil ACE. So thank you for checking out the video. Please check out the disassembly video if you're curious on how this rifle actually works and comes apart. And then check out some of the other stuff I have going on. Like, share, subscribe, and I'm going to have more stuff coming out for you in the near future to include a PCC series.